Alright, level 5.
Good morning, Dumelang, Sanibonani, Dumacheloni, Abusheni, Khoyemure, good day. Can everyone hear me? Hello? Thank you. Welcome to the Be Smart, Mind Your Money, Know Your Limits joint webinar. This is a webinar that is jointly hosted together. It's the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition, together or in collaboration with its entities, the National Consumer Commission, the National Credit Regulator, and proudly South African. This is a joint facilitated discussion on consumer spending during the festive season. This is done in order to raise awareness about consumer rights and spending wisely during this season. Regulators such as the National Credit Regulator, the National Consumer Commission ensure consumer protection, which would otherwise not be possible or feasible without them. Globally, industry regulators are increasingly seen as a much needed protection against consumer exploitation. This facilitated discussion or webinar is done in order to focus on practical and effective ways for consumers to know about their rights and responsibilities, and also to assist them to make informed decisions. During this webinar, we will cover a few points such as legislation, being the National Credit Act, the Consumer Protection Act, your rights as consumers and your responsibilities, and the most practical and successful ways or strategies to avoid being exploited. We will also cover your deceptive or unfair practices in marketing. We will also cover the benefits of purchasing proudly South African products, and also we'll share with you practical tips on spending wisely during the festive season. Without wasting any time, we will start with a video from Proudly South African. Unfortunately, Proudly South African were not able to join us today to be part of the panel. However, they will show us a short reel. It's a video with regards to living life locally. Living Lekker Locally is a Proudly South African campaign launched at the beginning of last month. This campaign shows how all of us can make wise purchasing decisions by buying locally manufactured items that we use on an everyday life. We can eat, drink, wear, watch, drive, basically use a locally made product every single minute of the day. There are over 40 local brands in this video to remind us that we can live lekker locally. Ladies and gentlemen, can we please take this time to watch a video from Proudly South African with regards to living life lekker locally? Oratile, please play us the video.
It's morning already? Okay, let's do this live thing. Okay, forgot to unpack my new Sheet Street fleece last night. Can't wait to use it tonight. I must say, it's not always easy to get ready for work, but every time I step into the bathroom, my bathroom lightens my morning because everything in my bathroom is locally made. I mean, can you believe CTM makes the stunning beauty of a bathtub right here in South Africa? Now for the hard part. Choosing what to wear. It's Friday. Definitely this casual piece along with my fave shoes from Mr. Price. Or will it be plus fab today? Cheaper with sneakers? So great to know I have so many choices. And perhaps I should go with my jewelry from NQ Jewelers to complement my outfit. Tepo needs to start polishing his own shoes now. I mean, he's in grade 3. He must set a good example for his baby sister. And oh, he needs to start packing his school bag too. On that note, let me make sure her food is ready so Daddy can feed her. Okay, 15 minutes left. Now for a good cup of coffee and a little breakfast to get me ready for the day. The only challenge with being a working mother is that you think about everyone and everything. I wonder if Ous Mavis has arrived so she can take care of my baby. Hubby really wanted to clean the garden and pool and at least start painting one of the walls. He also promised to go window shopping for those amazing dtic products I want for our new home. I wonder if he'll do all that today, but I'm sure he'll stop over for a local cup of pick-me-up. Ah, and by the way, that X3 is also made locally. Local is truly lacquer. Let's get to it. Need to book the boss's flight for the garden route tour he needs to take his clients on. Can't wait to cook hubby's favorite meal when I get home. I just love cooking. It has been a long day, therefore a quick meal will be ideal. Some chicken and veggies it is. We'll down that with wine and beer. Yummy. I can hardly wait. And of course, my favorite part of the day, a nightcap. Stay safe. Good night, South Africa. Buy local to create jobs. This is our call to action.
Thank you very much from Proudly South African for playing us that video. It's indeed very easy to live life locally using locally made products. We could see from the video that there were over 40 brands that were made locally. So it's not a difficult choice to make to use locally made products. With that being said, I would like to welcome each and every one of you for making time to join us in this webinar, the joint webinar from the DTIC, the National Credit Regulator, the National Consumer Commission, and Proudly South African. Welcome to everyone and thank you for joining us. Our program is not that long. It's a 2-hour session. We will have 3 people in the panelists. It will be 1 person from the DTIC, 1 person from the National Consumer Commission, and also 1 person from the National Credit Regulator. As we go along, you can type your questions on the Q&A. We will try and answer. We will also have a Q&A session at the end where we will be answering all the questions with time allowing, obviously. Without wasting any time, can we please welcome our first speaker? Our first speaker is Ms. Verushka Gilbert, sorry, from the DTIC. I just need to get my notes here to introduce Ms. Verushka. She is currently a senior manager for credit law and policy at the Consumer and Corporate Regulation branch of the DTIC. She is managing a dual work stream, which includes the consumer law and policies on an interim basis. Ms. Gilbert has extensive experience in policy and legislation. She previously worked at the DTIC's Trade Policy Negotiation and Cooperation branch, having been part of a team tasked with implementing the cabinet measures on investment policy reform. She has been involved in work for primary and subordinate legislation, participated in many multilateral work streams, such as Brazil, Russia, China, South Africa, which is BRICS, World Trade Organization, and also SADC. Her current work entails policy analysis and advancing policy positions, ongoing development of policies, interface, management of industry players, and research. Ladies and gentlemen, can you please welcome Ms. Verushka Gilbert. Welcome, Verushka. You can go ahead with your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Lebogang. Good morning to the panelists and to the attendees. I just want to get my presentation on screen. Lebogang, is it visible?
It's visible, thanks.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so basically this slide sets out the format of my presentation, but I will go through each of the topics as we progress through the presentation. So the purpose, as we all know, why we are here is to for the DTIC to contribute to the awareness on the spending during Black Friday and the upcoming, festive season, highlighting the general consumer rights in terms of credit. So the DTIC is responsible for administering various pieces of legislation. And for this purpose, it would be the National Credit Act, and that interlinks with the Consumer Protection Act. And the main purpose, obviously, is to educate and to empower our consumers to make informed decisions. And my contribution today is from a credit perspective. Black Friday is an event on consumers' calendars that's definitely difficult to ignore, with the growing interest in goods and services on offer, and more especially with the festive season upon us. So we hope that after today's session, consumers will be more empowered and be smart to manage their finances within limit and responsibly. The fact that you are attending this webinar today gives an indication that there is recognition that financial literacy is not just a question of knowledge, but being responsible as individuals and improving informed participation in the South African economy. So as consumers, your rights are guaranteed in terms of the Consumer Protection Act and the National Credit Act, which I will elaborate on as we progress with the presentation. I just want to highlight the legislative framework that would govern you as the consumer. So, we are reminded that our rights as citizens are enshrined in the Constitution, which is the supreme law of the land. And the two acts that I refer to is the NCA and the CPA listed here. These two acts are further aligned to the Constitution. For example, a fundamental right is the right to equality, and another one would be your right as a consumer to privacy. So finding fit in the broad picture, we also want to ensure that we do our bit as South Africa in working towards achieving the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals to ensure that no one is left behind. The SDGs, as they are referred to, is a universal call to action and end to poverty and protect the planet, and further to ensure that by 2030, all people enjoy peace and prosperity. So there are about 17 SDGs, and SDG 12 relates to responsible production and consumption. That is to ensure sustainable consumption and production patterns. The purpose behind this is to achieve economic growth and sustainable development by changing the way we as consumers produce and consume goods. As the DTIC, we want to develop and implement transparent regulatory solutions that would easily facilitate access to redress. And we also want to provide efficient regulation for the economic citizens in South Africa. So the NCA and CPA are administered by the DTIC, and we rely on a group of specialized agencies, which you will hear from later on. So these agencies would include your National Credit Regulator and your National Consumer Commission for purposes of today. And they support the DTIC in delivering products and services to the citizens of the country. The National Credit Act in particular is there to promote a fair and non-discriminatory marketplace for access to consumer credit, and for that purpose to provide for the general regulation of consumer credit. And the Consumer Protection Act is there amongst other aspects to protect your interests as consumers, and to also protect consumers from hazards to their well-being and safety. And it is further there to ensure that unethical suppliers and improper business practices are eliminated. Colleagues have already stated the purpose of the National Credit Act, but I want to draw your attention to the last bullet as well on promoting responsible credit granting and prohibiting reckless lending and providing for debt reorganization where consumers are over-indebted. Just to establish the basic principles, which I'm sure you are already conversant with, but this would give the necessary clarity to you. A credit provider is any person that offers or lends money under a credit agreement. And to be a credit provider, it is mandatory that you have to be registered with the Credit Regulator. A credit provider who is not registered under the Credit Act is not permitted to offer or enter into any credit agreement with the consumer. And then the other term I use is a credit agreement, which can take the form of a credit card, overdraft, your retail card, personal loan, and so on. So what do we mean by over-indebted when we say consumers are over-indebted? Section 79 of the Act clarifies what over-indebtedness is. And quite simply put, it is a determination that is made that indicates that a particular consumer will not be able to satisfy all the obligations under a credit agreement to which the consumer is party to. Just going to move on to the violation of consumer rights. Excuse me. So the violation of consumer rights have taken place in many ways. You might have experienced this as consumers or not. So consumer credit rights are protected in terms of Section 66 of the Act. It is a violation where a credit provider should not discriminate directly or indirectly against the consumer. And a credit provider is also not permitted to treat consumers any differently, so basically not discriminating between a consumer in terms of who should get credit and who should not. A credit provider is also not expected to penalize the consumer for whatever reason, or further on to alter or indicate to the consumer that they intend to alter the terms and conditions of the credit agreement. This is certainly not permitted in terms of the Act and is a prohibited practice. The credit provider is also not permitted to take action to accelerate or suspend or terminate the credit agreement without the consent of the consumer. So these would constitute a violation of rights. And another way is, where consumer rights are violated, as I've indicated in bullet 2, is the unfair discrimination in terms of Section 61. That's explicit to the credit provider, as I had referred to. But further on, this is a right in terms of the Constitution, in terms of your right as the consumer to be treated equally. So this is further on set in other acts, and I will not go into that because it becomes overly cumbersome to refer to different pieces of legislation. For purposes of this webinar, I think you can rely on the Credit Act and the Constitution. Reckless lending referred to here is basically referring to a situation where a credit provider would fail to conduct an affordability assessment for the consumer, or if the credit provider, having conducted such an assessment, enters into an agreement with the consumer that causes the consumer to become over-indebted. And this is in terms of Section 60 of the Act. So colleagues, everything that I am referring here in terms of the violation of consumer rights is contained in the Credit Act. So if a credit provider fails to conduct the assessment, that particular credit agreement is automatically classified as reckless credit. And I will speak to affordability assessments in my next slide. Moving on to disclosure and information in terms of Section 156 of the Credit Act, this relates to the breach of confidence. So it is an offense to disclose any confidential information concerning the affairs of any person obtained. And in this case, that person would relate to you as the consumer. And we also have another piece of legislation which more recently has gained much prominence, and that is POPIA, the Protection of Personal Information Act, which regulates how anyone who processes personal information must handle and make sure that that particular information is secure. And this would then include your credit providers. So unlawful processing of your information is not intended for any other purpose and is constituted as a violation of rights. So this would tie in then with with security and privacy, because POPIA gives effect to the constitutional right to privacy by safeguarding your personal information as consumers. So I think we are all conversant as to what personal information constitutes. And one of the conditions of POPIA is for measures to be put in place to secure the integrity and confidentiality of personal information. And then this responsibility will reside with the credit provider to make sure that your information remains confidential and is securely stored, be it physically or in terms of electronic security that needs to be maintained. So accessing and challenging credit records is in terms of Section 72 of the Credit Act. Every person has a right to be advised by a credit provider before prescribed adverse consumer information is reported to it by a credit bureau. And you have a right to receive a copy of that information if you request it. So consumers you are entitled to challenge the accuracy of any information that concerns yourself. So please also note that if you are applying for credit, a credit provider cannot require you to obtain or request a report from the credit bureau in connection with applying for a credit. So it's while you do have access to a credit bureau, a credit provider cannot expect of you to request that report and provide it to the credit provider. The last bullet point that I refer to is advertising practices that relates to credit providers. And I'm sure you'll hear about this later on as the webinar progresses. This is where the seller of any goods or services that are being, this relates to where goods and services are advertised and are required to be purchased on credit. So please be wary and do not fall prey to unregistered parties who claim to be credit providers. They are prohibited from advertising credit and goods and services. So advertising of credit, should not be misleading. It should not be fraudulent, and it should not be intended to deceive you as the consumers. So you might come across phrases like no credit checks and free credit and guaranteed loans. Consumers, I just want to make you aware that, this is strictly prohibited. Do not rely on, such parties to assist you. Colleagues and consumers are not always, aware about how confidentiality, about how affordability assessments are conducted. It is referred here in bullet 3, where it specifically refers to a credit provider that will consider the amount of outstanding credit that a consumer already owes. And this will form part of the assessment of the consumer in terms of the consumer's general affordability to repay the credit. Because remember, when you engage in a credit agreement, you are required to honor your obligations in terms of that credit agreement. So this affordability assessment that is conducted by the credit provider is a proper and comprehensive pre-assessment of your affordability to make the repayments in terms of that credit agreement. So it's also there to ensure that reckless spending is avoided. So what is your duty as a consumer? In terms of Section 81 of the Act on the prevention of reckless credit, the prospective consumer must be fully and truthfully be able to answer any request made by the credit provider as part of the assessment when applying for credit agreements. And, often we have consumers, engaging and completing information, but untruthfully so. So you have an obligation in terms of the credit agreement and for your own, good financial standing to ensure that the information you supply is truthful and accurate. So this slide basically speaks to your, accessing of credit and how you can avoid becoming over indebted. So as consumers, it is important that you familiarize yourselves with your rights in terms of the Credit Act and in terms of the Consumer Protection Act. And in particular, Chapter 4 of the Credit Act speaks about the consumer credit aspects. So every person has the right to apply for credit. But as I mentioned earlier, you have a corresponding obligation to fulfill your repayments in terms of that credit agreement. Credit agreements can be filled with legal jargon, and it is advisable that before you commit to a credit agreement, that you take the time to peruse the content of that credit agreement and understand what the credit agreement says and what is required of you. Very often we are very hasty as consumers to engage into credit agreements because of the need or the want, that presents itself before us. But don't let this work to your detriment. Take the time to understand what the credit agreement is all about, because remember, once you sign the credit agreement, you have to honor your financial obligation. So don't be hasty to sign. And even if you request for a physical copy or via email, it will afford you the opportunity to thoroughly think about your commitment and perhaps take time to reflect on whether this is something that you really want to commit to. So consumers have a right to information and to get that particular information in an official language in terms of Section 63 of the Act. So, a consumer can receive any document in terms of the Credit Act in an official language that the consumer, can read and understand, and to the extent that it is reasonable. Also, the information must be in a plain and understandable language for the consumer. So if you are a credit provider, please ensure that, how you frame your credit agreements is in a language that is understandable to consumers. And, if you're already over indebted, please avoid going into further debt. Some people take loans to pay other loans. This is the reality. So it's best to start paying your debts with the highest interest rates first. And if you find that you already have a negative balance after all your debts and expenses are taken off at the end of the month, please avoid further borrowing and curb your spending. If borrowing is granted, it does then suggest that there is reckless lending on the part of the credit provider, as they have not done their due diligence to assess your application and determine if you are credit worthy. Excuse me. So there are always additional costs involved when you do engage into a credit agreement. And these costs are apart from the principal credit amount. So it would include your interest rates, your monthly repayment value, which you should be advised of, and aspects like credit life insurance. I'll just speak about that in a bit. All credit agreements need to disclose this information. You as the consumer should ask for it if it is not stated in the credit agreement. And you should get this information in writing. A credit provider is not supposed to unilaterally increase any of these service fees or interests. And if so, the credit provider must give you written notice of at least 5 business days, setting out what exactly are the particulars of the change. I refer to credit life insurance. So this is insurance that's basically taken out by a consumer to cover a debt that they have incurred in the event that there is a disability or retrenchment, or even where there is, death of the consumer, that the credit life insurance would be able to cover this. So it ensures that the loan will be paid should something happen to the consumer. The usual fee for credit life insurance is about R4.50 per 1,000 rands. And that's insofar as credit life insurance is concerned. And moving on to the last bullet, very often we are contacted by credit providers asking us to consent to credit limit increases. So, I mean, it is always advisable to decline this option, so you have a limited credit value to work with, and you are able to manage it accordingly, in place of an ever-expanding credit amount that would more likely set you, into further debt if your spending is not managed properly. And in keeping with the theme of today, you should know your limits. Moving on, colleagues. Just want to speak about the role and responsibilities of credit providers. As I had stated earlier, a credit agreement should be in plain language, and they have to be legally sound. In terms of Section 93 of the Credit Act, a credit provider is required to deliver to the consumer a copy of the credit agreement, well, either in hard copy or in a printable electronic format. So this is available by your credit provider and without charge. All credit providers must ensure that affordability assessments are conducted, failing which they will be liable for reckless lending. In terms of declining to grant credit, Section 62 of the Credit Act states, that they will have to be reasons provided where credit is refused to be granted to you as the consumer. So you can request the credit provider, to inform you of the reasons for declining the credit, and also where, there is a lower credit limit that is offered, you can request for reasons to be disclosed as to, why this is the reason. And where you are refused a request to increase the credit limit as well, you can request for those reasons to be provided to you. You have a right to confidential treatment, and this basically refers to any person who receives, compiles, or reports on confidential information relating to a consumer or prospective consumer must protect the confidentiality of that information. So it's basically what I had stated before, and there has to be compliance with POPIA at all times. So Section 121 speaks to the last aspect on the consumer's right to rescind a credit agreement. A consumer is entitled to terminate a credit agreement within 5 business days after signing it. So you can do so by delivering a notice to the credit provider in the prescribed manner. Sometimes you will find that credit providers have specific forms or templates that you would need to fill in should you wish to terminate the agreement. Colleagues, my last slide basically relates to access to credit in respect of capital accumulation, but it might not necessarily speak to, Black Friday as such, because what I will speak to in terms of developmental credit, etc., is more on a long-term basis. But I'll start with stokvels, and I think we all are familiar with stokvels and how it operates. So quite simply, it's a rotating financial scheme that is totally engaged in by consumers on a voluntary basis. And basically, it's capital that is raised through the contribution of members. And I must state that a stokvel is not a credit agreement. So while the Credit Act does refer to it, it is definitely not a credit agreement in terms of the Act. So, I mean, we all know the benefits of a stokvel, and, you know, it's used to supplement income and to help households meet their basic needs, to pay for aspects such as school fees, and to also, you know, it provides an opportunity to network and to grow businesses. So it's a simple way to accumulate capital and to avoid accessing credit through the formalized systems with high interest rates. So, I mean, stokvels are usually very popular in, you know, low-income households, and it is defined in other acts. I will now speak about the developmental credit agreements, and as I mentioned, it is governed in terms of Section 10 of the Credit Act. So developmental credit is used, you know, it can be used for educational loans, for developing small businesses, and for low-income housing, should you wish to acquire housing, build or expand. So developmental credit is there to improve access to business opportunities. And if you're looking to develop your business over a long term, this is an aspect that you can consider. Any developmental credit provider is required to register with the credit regulator. And in terms of the regulations, there is no requirement for an affordability assessment to be conducted for developmental credit purposes. Colleagues, this brings me to the end of my presentation. I know that, you know, presentations on acts and regulations, it's generally filled with a lot of policy jargon, and you know, we refer to specific sections, but you know, in the Act and in the Constitution. But your rights as consumers are guaranteed in terms of these pieces of legislation, which is why it's important to raise it to you. I'm certain that my colleagues from the NCC and the NCR can advise more and to a greater extent on the practicalities, given the theme of the webinar of today. Just some practical guidance, colleagues. Consumers are urged to exercise caution when spending on Black Friday and during the festive season. So take stock of your finances every so often. You know, if you have to do it on a weekly basis, do so, just to ensure that you do not overcommit yourself financially. Know your limit and don't get caught up in the hype of festivities, only to realize by the end of December or early January that poor consumer decision-making has cost you. So just be very cautious and be realistic about what you can spend and what you cannot afford. If you cannot afford it, it's just best that you don't buy it. You know, satisfying the basic needs of your family and of your household are more important than acquiring goods that are going to leave you in a state of financial distress and mental distress. So be a smart consumer and mind your money, especially during these current uncertain economic times. I'll just like to hand over to Lebo to continue further with the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Verushka. Thank you for the presentation. I see we've got some questions on the Q&A. We will take them as we go along. As Verushka has said, she has covered a lot with regards to policy when it comes to the CPA and the NCA, the National Credit Act. We will now continue with our program where we will have Jimmy Kolele, who's from the National Credit Regulator. He'll delve more into the National Credit Act, the implementation thereof, giving practical tips. So Jimmy Kolele is an educator by profession. He's the Senior Education and Communication Officer at the National Credit Regulator. Prior to joining the National Credit Regulator, he worked for the Limpopo Department of Economic Development, Environment and Tourism, where he occupied various positions, including, amongst others, Deputy Manager for Consumer Education, Consumer Advisor, Trade. He was also Trade Inspector and Liquor Inspector. Prior to joining the corporate life, Jimmy Kolele was a teacher at Rangani High School. And having said that, he remains to be an educator and a communicator. Let's welcome Jimmy Kolele to take us through the practical methods in terms of the National Credit Act and the tips thereof for spending wisely through Black Friday and going forth into the festive season. Welcome, Jimmy.
Thank you, Lebu. Good morning to all the panelists and good morning to all the attendees. As indicated by Lebu, my name is Jimmy Kolele. I'm the Senior Education and Communication Officer at the National Credit Regulator. Once a teacher, always a teacher, and luckily I'm passionate about what I do. I do not have any slides to share. I'll simply be talking to you. Or Atili, I'm not sure if it's possible to put me on the main platform, given that I won't be sharing any slides. If it is not possible, it's fine. I'll continue where I am. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no doubt that times are tough and the struggle is real. Even before the onset of COVID-19 and the subsequent lockdowns and all the frustrations that we have had to go through, things were tough. Our economy as a country was not performing that well, and then battered by the COVID-19, things just got worse. And it is under such circumstances where we all try and benefit from sales, fantastic discounts, anything where we can scrape for a cent to save, we'll try and take advantage of that. However, we should be cognizant of the fact that not all that says or advertises itself as a sale is necessarily a sale. So we should be careful of that. Allow me to share some statistics with you in terms of where we stand as a country in terms of debt and credit. In terms of our Credit Bureau Monitor report and our credit market report, which are compiled on a quarterly basis. The last one, which was compiled for June 2021. As a country, there are 26.22 million credit active consumers. Ms. Gilbert spoke at length about credit, how we use credit, our rights in the credit space. Now, with those rights and the responsibilities that we have, there are currently, or as at June, there were 26.22 million credit active consumers. Out of that 26 million credit active consumers, 16 million are in good standing. It means their accounts are up to date. They answer their private numbers. They go to work every day. They are in control of their debts. However, a whopping 10 million consumers, 10.07 to be specific, million consumers are in the red. They are struggling with their debts. They are receiving summons. Their accounts are in arrears, 1 or 2 or 3 months in arrears. They are getting judgments. They typically would be amongst those consumers who would avoid private numbers when a call comes through and it doesn't show who is calling. They would typically avoid such calls. Now, that shows that we are struggling as a country. We are struggling as consumers. If 10 million consumers are struggling, on Saturday, I happened to be in the Free State in Putadichaba, to be precise. When I was speaking to the consumers there, I checked the population size and they told me people in Free State are roughly 2 million. So if 10 million consumers are struggling, that simply means all the people in Free State multiplied by 5 are struggling to pay for their accounts. They are in the red. Now, further statistics that you may be interested in, you will recall Ms. Gilbert indicated that you have the right to receive a free credit report from all the registered credit bureaus. Now, out of the 26 million credit active consumers, only 9%, which is about 588,000, asked for their credit reports between April and June 2021. A mere 588,000 out of the 26 million credit active consumers. So, and out of that 588,000, 548 got their reports free, because in terms of the National Credit Act, every consumer has the right to be given a credit report once a year. And here and now today, ladies and gentlemen, I'm encouraging you, if for this year you have not requested your free credit report, we are encouraging you to do so. It helps you in a number of ways to see your credit report. You check if your information is correct. You check if you have not been a victim of ID theft, because we have a problem of identity theft in South Africa and the world over. So when you check your credit report, you get to see if there are no people who have bought stuff in your name that you may not be aware of. You might find yourself driving a Skodonki, whereas somebody is driving a Bentley that was bought in your name. So it is ideal that from time to time you should check your credit report. And to show that there is a reason to check your credit report, out of that 588 that I mentioned, or that I indicated that they got their credit reports between April and June, 30,000 consumers lodged consumers with the credit bureaus because they were not happy with some of the information that appeared in their credit reports. Meaning you may be sitting and not accessing your credit reports, and yet there is something that is wrong in your credit report. You may be struggling to get credit. Credit providers may be refusing to give you credit because there is information that is wrong that appears in your credit report. And until you apply or request your free credit report, you will not be able to see this information and be able to challenge that information. Because in terms of the National Credit Act, if there is wrong information in your credit report, you have the right to challenge such information. And when you have challenged the information, the credit bureau must investigate and within 20 business days be able to resolve your problem. If they resolve your problem, all is good and well. If they don't, then you can escalate your complaint to the National Credit Regulator, and then we'll attempt to help you. While they're investigating, they must gray list your information that you are challenging, so that it doesn't put you at a disadvantage when you apply for credit and people either score you negatively based on wrong information. So credit bureaus need to gray list that particular information. So from there, let's look at Ms. Verushka or Ms. Gilbert indicated that we are an over-indebted nation. However, she did not go into what causes. She explained what over-indebtedness is, reckless lending, but then she did not touch on what causes over-indebtedness. The fact that 10 million people are struggling with making repayments on their debt obligations is a sign that a lot of consumers are over-indebted. We are an over-indebted nation, but we need to find out what causes this over-indebtedness. What makes us to be in that particular situation? Some of the reasons why people are over-indebted or consumers are over-indebted in South Africa are beyond our control, ladies and gentlemen. But then there are also causes that are within our control. There are causes that we can do something about to change the situation. For instance, the occurrence of lockdown, the sluggish economy, interest rates going up, all those are things beyond our control, you and I. However, there are things that if we take care of, we may be able to deal partly with the issue of over-indebtedness. Amongst others, one, we get over-indebted because we lack proper planning. We don't plan properly, ladies and gentlemen. We all knew there will be Black Friday this year. Maybe by January, we did not know it will be on the 26th of November, but we definitely knew in November there will be Black Friday. We all knew there will be the festive season. Our kids will want Christmas clothes if you belong to that sector of the economy where Christmas clothes are a norm. We all knew our children will want to go for holidays. We all know our children are growing and they will want to go to tertiary at one stage. However, are we planning for all these events? Are we saving money? Are we in our budget? Are we including a saving so that we are able to cover these eventualities as and when they happen? While we may have known from January that our kids will want clothes for Christmas, I can say without a fear of contradiction that some consumers will buy their children's clothes using credit from their credit cards, credit from the machonistas, who are in the main unregistered credit providers and will operate outside what the provisions of the law allow. So if we plan properly, we put ourselves in a position whereby we can better manage our finances and we can avoid getting over indebted. We get over indebted because we lack knowledge and we ignore financial products. We lack knowledge of finances. I can assure you, ladies and gentlemen, there is a lot of people walking around with certificates, degrees, diplomas, others even maybe having as far as doctorates and what have you. They are highly learned, but financially illiterate. We lack financial knowledge. And surprisingly, we also do our best not to get any information in terms of finances. You will agree with me. Most of us, when we're watching the news and they say, after the break, economic news, what do? We change the channel because we don't want to hear the economic news. We don't want to hear how the rand is performing, what is going up and what is going down. So we need to up our game in terms of financial knowledge so that we understand how the financial world works, so that we understand how credit works, so that if you go and buy an item, you are then aware that an item that you buy for cash, an item that you lay by, and an item that you buy on credit will have different financial consequences. For instance, if you buy on credit, credit comes at a cost. There is a cost for credit. The credit provider is allowed in terms of the National Credit Act to charge you interest, which is regulated, to charge you once-off initiation fees, to charge you monthly service fees, and to charge you credit life insurance. If you are a good consumer, that is all you are going to pay for the credit that you are going to get. However, if you are a consumer who pays as and when they feel like, or who pays the amount that they think is necessary at a particular month and not what was agreed in terms of the credit agreement, then the credit provider is bound to charge you default charges, which we call arrears in everyday language. Sometimes you will pay your account, but pay after the due date. Then the credit provider will still charge you default charges because you paid after the date that you had agreed to make your payment. If you are a serial defaulter, the credit provider will hand your debt over to debt collectors and then you will become liable for collection charges. Now, if you knew all that and you avoided all that, you will be in a better position to manage your finances and to avoid getting over indebted. Competition. We get into debt and subsequently become over indebted because we are competing with people. If your colleague buys upgrades and buy a new car, you want a new car. If they move from Atteridgeville to the east, you also want to move from Soshanguve to the east. But then you don't know their financial circumstances, you don't know their financial means. So every consumer should stay in their lane because you will end up being over indebted. Sometimes you're simply looking for the address in the east, but you do not know the consequences that comes with being in the east. You will find that where you were, the schools were no fee paying schools, but when you go to the east, the school fee is 3,500 before after care, and the transport to take your kids to school is something else, and then you have a longer distance to drive from your home to work, and other consequences and other costs that you may not have been aware when you took the decision to compete with your neighbor or friend or colleague. So we should avoid competing and stay in our lanes. Peer pressure. We allow our friends, our colleagues, our neighbors, and whoever who is in our life to dictate what we do in our life, what we wear, what we eat, where we stay, what we drive, what we drink. However, these people are not responsible for the payments at the end of the day. We are responsible for the payments. So you should not be pressurized into doing things that are not within your means. We normally say live within your means. However, if you are pandering to the whims of your friends and colleagues and whoever, you are unlikely to live beyond what you can afford. And as a result, you may end up over indebted. We allow greed and blind faith to make us uninformed and reckless decisions when it comes to our finances and the credit agreements that we get ourselves into. You will get a message in your phone saying you won 1 million or 3 million from the Brazil South Africa 2010 World Cup and it's 2021, and you believe that nonsense. Did you enter a competition in the first place? When you call whoever whoever they will instruct you to call in the SMS, they will tell you, no, your millions are in the Russian dollars. So for us to transfer the money to you in South Africa, you need to pay us 7,500, which you don't have. Now you'll go to a Mashonisa and borrow 7,500 and he charges you an illegal interest of 50%. Now, when you deposit that 7,500, they throw the SIM card away. The next time you call, the phone doesn't go through. You owe them a Shonisa 7,500 plus 50%. And you know they want it in 1 month. Now you are in serious trouble. You are over indebted. But why did you become over indebted? Because you believed stuff even a grade 1 or a kid in kindergarten or creche shouldn't be believing or won't believe. So because of our blind faith and greed, we sometimes tend to make reckless financial decisions, and as a result of which we end up being over indebted. Now, as we're heading over to the festive season and with Black Friday looming tomorrow, here are a few tips that I want to share with you, ladies and gentlemen, in the platform. One, we hope you have saved for Black Friday and for your festive expenses. If you have not saved for Black Friday, if you can, stay away from the shops. Because if you go and participate in Black Friday using credit, it defeats the purpose. The pool of Black Friday is the fantastic offers and discounts which the retailers are offering. However, if you are going to buy these things on credit, it defeats the purpose, because when you buy on credit, the credit provider will charge you interest, service fee, initiation fee, and credit life insurance, pushing back the amount that you will pay to even more than the original price before the discount or before Black Friday. So you should be careful as and when you decide to go and buy stuff on credit. If you choose to buy on credit, despite the warnings that you are getting, because I've seen various warnings from various quarters, particularly to people or consumers who have not saved. If you choose to ignore these warnings and still go ahead and buy on credit, make sure you can afford the installments. Because if you don't, the credit provider will negatively list you in the credit bureaus. When they negatively list you in the credit bureaus, it will now make it difficult for you to access credit. Or if you can access credit, because you may be deemed as a high-risk consumer, the credit providers may charge you the interest at the maximum level. The credit providers may charge you the interest at the maximum level. Avoid borrowing from unregistered credit providers. Avoid borrowing from unregistered credit providers. Yes, sir, noted. Avoid borrowing from unregistered credit providers. These credit providers are likely to take your ID cards, your bank cards, and your SASA cards, and even demand your PINs. However, if you borrow from registered credit providers, that the chance of that is minimal. And if it happens, when you report the case, it is easy for us as the National Credit Regulator to be able to trace these credit providers and bring them to book. Be vigilant as and when you participate in Black Friday. Some of the things that you see being advertised are scams. You will find a fantastic holiday being advertised in Cape Town. You will take your credit card, pay, and only to discover that what looked like a 5-star is actually a no star. The only stars that you will be seeing will be in the sky. So you need to be careful of falling victim to scams, particularly for anything that you do online and on the internet. So you need to be careful about such things. As those of you who may be getting your bonuses or big pays, as they call them in some quarters, you need to make sure you also prioritize paying some debts. If you have debt obligations, don't blow your bonus on the festivities, on the mainyas of Christmas. Also use part of that bonus to try and pay off some debt that you may be having, so that you start the year on a clean slate. And also keep in mind, for those of you who will be getting your salaries earlier, because most companies, most employers will be closing for the festive season. A lot of consumers will get their pays earlier than normal. So if you are one of those, make sure that keep in mind that your December salary, which you may get on 10 December, will have to last you until your next payday, which will be late January. So make sure there is still something sufficient to keep you going until then. There will still be expenses to be met as and when that time comes. And then in closing, ladies and gentlemen, while we may need to survive, while we may need to keep up with the friends, while we may need to enjoy the festive season, while we may need to take part in rejuvenating and keeping our economy going, let's make sure we don't do that at our own personal expense and our own financial expense. Let's make financial decisions that we will not regret. Uh, the theme for this webinar is Be Smart, Mind Your Money, and Know Your Limits. So my question to you as I step off the platform will be, as we speak, do you know your limits when it comes to your finances and the credit that you should be accessing? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jimmy. Thanks, Jimmy. I told you Jimmy is a teacher he did say that once a teacher, always a teacher. Thank you very much for the insightful tips, practical tips. I think what we can take from your presentation, Jimmy, it's what I heard is that we should avoid unregistered credit providers. And also we should stay in our lane, especially avoid a comparison with neighbors, colleagues, friends, etc. And also avoid peer pressure. And also tomorrow being Black Friday, did we really budget for it? So thank you very much for the presentation. Without wasting time, we're gonna introduce Tobani. Tobani Ngobo is from the National Consumer Commission. He'll be our third speaker in the panel. So Tobani Ngobo is a seasoned public education specialist who currently works for the National Consumer Commission, where he is responsible for consumer education. He has worked in the public sector for over 15 years, primarily in the fields of public education, communication, and advocacy. He has also worked in different government sectors across the country. He holds a variety of qualifications in public administration, public relations, and development communication, amongst others. His highest qualification is a master's in public administration, and he obtained it from the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Thank you very much. Welcome, Tobani. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Tobani. Thank you.
Thank you, Lego. I'm just going to switch off my camera to allow the audio quality to be good. Firstly, let me greet everybody in the name of consumer protection, and also would like to congratulate everybody for making it this far amid the COVID-19 pandemic. But let me reassure everybody that the consumer rights are sacrosanct even during the COVID-19 pandemic. Without a waste of time, I will request Oratile to share my presentation, and I will quickly go through the presentation outline. I will briefly give background about the presentation, and then I'll give a definition of what a consumer is, and then I will elaborate on the 8 consumer rights, and also I will look at what the consumers are subject to. I will have a message to the consumers, and then I will give you the layers of the consumer protection in South Africa, and then I will also be giving some important tips for Black Friday and festive season shopping. Firstly, giving background, I would like to tell you about the National Consumer Commission, who we are, what do we do, and where do we come from. The National Consumer Commission was established in terms of Act 85, Section 85 of the Consumer Protection Act 68 of 2008. We are a commission which has jurisdiction throughout the country. However, we have concurrent jurisdiction with other regulators, such regulators as NCR, which spoke in a short while. We are part of a collective, of regulators, which is a Consumer Protection Forum, which is a voluntary association of regulators. Now I will move on to defining what a consumer is. A consumer is anyone who has goods and services marketed to in an ordinary course of business. So it means that you and I are consumers. And just to actually broaden that, I would like to say, if you receive gift, you're still a consumer. If you use any products that were purchased, you still remain a consumer. Which is why I'm saying almost everybody or almost all of us are consumers. As consumers, we have certain rights that we should be aware of, and we should assert them. The previous speaker spoke about the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Our rights, the consumer rights, are an extension of the Bill of Rights, which is in the Chapter 2 of the Constitution. Moving forward, I would like to mention the 8 consumer rights that we have. We have a right to equality in the consumer market, and we have the right to privacy. We have the right to choose products. We have the right to disclosure of information. We have the right to fair and responsible marketing, right to fair and honest dealing, right to fair, just and reasonable terms and conditions, and right to fair value, good quality, and safety. Let me give context to each and every one of the rights mentioned. The right to equality in the consumer market refers to the right, to protection against discriminatory marketing. I will give an example, especially in the hospitality industry. I'm sure every one of us have heard of issues wherein the hospitality, some of the wedding venues would not take bookings from Black consumers, but would take bookings for other races. So that is against the Consumer Protection Act, and it's actually deprive people of the right to equality in the consumer market. We also have the right to privacy. We all aware and we all receive calls from telemarketers marketing products and services. In as much as they may do so if we have opted in, if we requested that marketing be done to us. But there are times that are prescribed by the Consumer Protection Act, and those times are weekdays 8 to 8, and on Saturdays 9 to 1, and on Sundays there should be no contact at all. We also have a right to choose. Some suppliers would sell us bundled goods. We have a right to purchase single items if we wish so. And as consumers, we have a right to examine goods that are purchased through direct marketing, whether it's telephonic or online. And we are also entitled to 5 days cooling period without incurring any penalties. There's also a right to disclosure of information. Just to give an example, we have a right to know what products or what ingredients are used in a particular product. As consumers, we also have rights to demand credit agreements, contracts, and other transaction-related documents and information in plain and understandable languages. We have a right to have till slips, and those till slips should conform to a standard wherein there will be the name of the supplier, the contact details, the address, and so forth. We also have a right to fair and responsible marketing. We are protected against bait marketing. Bait marketing is wherein suppliers would market or would advertise a product at a certain price, but when you go into the shop, you are told that the product is finished, and then you are redirected to other products, similar products, but at normally they will be at a more expensive price. But as a consumer, you probably have set your mind to get the product, and you end up buying that product which you did not intend to. We also have a right to fair and honest dealings. As consumers, we should be aware that pyramid schemes are not allowed; they are illegal. And if you actually participate in any of the schemes, you are also committing a crime. I am then going to move on to what are we subject to as consumers. As consumers, we are flooded with unbelievable information on special that will be offered for sale during Black Friday and festive season. We are always enticed with advertisement, SMSs, emails by different service providers, enticing us to come to their stores or buy online for products that they deem or that they say they are on sale. We need to be savvy and be vigilant so that we scrutinize that information and act on it. As a consumer, you can do the following. You can scan the market and see and compare a price from different suppliers. We can also ask ourselves a question: if it's really worth it, do I have the money? Can I afford it? Is what I'm buying really a bargain? And so forth. I also have a message to consumers. Consumers are also cautioned to be wary of hype marketing that fails to deliver on its promises. Hype marketing is whereby you are bombarded with messages saying that there are massive discounts, there are massive savings, and so forth, and you end up getting enticed and then make impulsive purchasing. They should also know that they have a right to return goods and services that were purchased on sale, and that right is also extended to goods and services that were purchased online. And consumers are urged to be smart and to be well informed. They should buy proudly South African products and be smart consumers by refusing to succumb to gimmick marketing and advertising. But most importantly, they must report any consumer right transgression to the National Consumer Commission Contact Center on 012-428-7000. I will move on to discuss the layers of protection that we have. We have 9 provinces, and in the 9 provinces we have the consumer protection authorities, which in some instances some provinces would have the consumer, the provincial consumer tribunals. They are the first they are first layer of protection for consumers, especially for when the consumer and the supplier fall in the same province. And then we also have the alternative district resolution agents. They are MIOSA and CGSO. MIOSA is a motor industry ombudsman of South Africa and the consumer goods and services ombudsman. These two ADRs are the only ADRs that are accredited in terms of the X. And then we have at the national level, the National Consumer Commission and the National Credit Regulator and other regulators. And the fourth layer would be the National Consumer Tribunal. This layer, it's normally in a norm, NCC or NCR will actually be referring matters and act on behalf of the consumers and become a complainant. Then I will move on to giving important tips for Black Friday and festive season shopping. I will refer you to some provisions of the CPA. For example, the section 14 of the CPA, which speaks to the terms of fixed term contracts and returns and refund. I would like to tell you that you are eligible for refunds. However, you need to keep your till slips so that you will have proof and you'll be able to get a refund, failing which you may come and approach either one of us and make a complaint. Section 16 of the CPA also refers to the cooling off period after direct marketing. As I've mentioned earlier, there's 5 days cooling off period after which you have purchased a product, especially online. And if you so feel that you're no longer interested or want the product, you can return the product at no penalty. And then I will also go on to share with you that section 23 of the CPA requires the suppliers display prices of goods and services. And then I will also refer to section 56 of the CPA, which speaks to implied warranty of quality, meaning that after you've purchased a product, you should have warranty, and that warranty should be at least 6 months from the date of purchase. And then section 61 of the CPA relates to product reliability. All of these provisions, they actually giving you the consumer the tips on on how to actually carry yourself after you have purchased a product and probably you are feeling like you want to return them. Then going forward, I have shared the National Consumer Commission Contact Center number, which is 012-428-7000. If you have any queries, you may send an email to inquiries@ncc.org.za. With that said, I would like to say compliments of the season to everybody, and also urge you to be smart, to mind your money, and to know your limits. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tobani, from the National Consumer Commission. Thank you with regards to those tips and our rights when it comes to the Consumer Protection Act. So from the presentations that we've heard, we can see that we are indeed protected as a South African consumer from both the Consumer Protection Act and the National Credit Act. And also from the video from Proudly South Africa, we could see that we indeed do have a variety when it comes to purchasing locally made products. So without wasting time, we will cover any questions that have not yet been covered from our Q&A. I know we've been trying to answer as much as we can in the background, but if there are any additional questions, if we can just check in the Q&A and chat box, we can cover those. So if maybe you still need clarity with regards to a question that you've asked, please let us know so that we can be able to answer that. I see Jimmy has also provided us with contact details from the National Credit Regulator. We saw from Tobani's presentation as well, he gave us contacts from the National Consumer Commission. Maybe Verushka can also provide us with contact details for the DTIC. And I've also seen a request for making presentations available. I think that can be done to make the presentations available. And then with regards to some of the questions that I've got, I'll start with Verushka. One of my questions that I've got for Verushka is when it comes to developmental credit, there was one of the questions that says, can you please expand on that? And I asked with regards to any specifics with regards to that. So maybe if you can tell us a bit more, Verushka, with regards to developmental credit, just briefly, with regards to that, because you touched on it in your presentation.
Thanks, Lebo. And thanks for flagging that. I'm just having a look at the chat, and yes, indeed, it is one of the questions that came up. So developmental credit agreements, it is governed in terms of Section 10 of the Act. And as I stated, it's used for educational loans, development of small businesses, and for housing purposes. So basically, if you want to be a developmental credit provider, you are required to register with the NCR, and you will receive a supplementary registration certificate. You know, if you are applying for developmental credit as a consumer, the requirements, well, it's a bit more relaxed because there is no affordability assessment conducted for this purpose. However, developmental credit providers, they still have to ensure that consumers are familiar with the costs, the risks, and all the obligations that are contained in the credit agreement. So the consumer has to be, you know, understanding of what the arrangement is. Arranging for developmental credit, the credit provider will have to then, consider the credit bureau information, which we've heard about earlier from previous speakers, and would also have to assess the prospective income in terms of their developmental enterprise and what its current and prospective expenses would be. So it's not an easy exercise, but you know, if you are determined, you know, these are the regular practices you would have to comply with in any case if you want to form a business. Such credit providers would include your institutions such as your banks, and there are prescribed fees associated with developmental credit agreements. So it's a special credit in terms of the credit agreement, just with less rigorous rules. And there are, well, the cost of credit would include your fees and your interest rates, etc. So consumers, you are entitled to receive this information. Yeah, I think that's insofar as developmental credit is concerned, but there is a maximum threshold for developmental credit. The total asset value or annual turnover should not exceed R1 million. So developmental credit agreements, it does have a cap of R1 million. Thanks, Lebo.
Thank you, Verushka. Thanks for the clarity. I also have one additional question for you, Verushka, in terms of financing or other alternative methods. What other financing mechanisms and savings can consumers rely on?
Thanks, Lebo. Well, I mean, the one option we discussed was the stop belt. It's just a simpler way to do it. But, you know, I mean, it comes down to an individual practice. I am not able to give you options in terms of financial schemes that can assist you. It would be more from a National Treasury perspective. But I mean, you know, consumers are encouraged to put in place their own savings plans and, you know, explore the options with your financial services providers. I know there are schemes with, for example, Old Mutual, you know, where you have a plan in place and you can access these savings at any particular time without penalties, etc. So the industry has many options to offer. You, as the consumer, would just have to explore what is feasible for you given your financial standing and what is it you can afford and, you know, that you are able to access in the event that there is an emergency without having to subject yourself to bureaucratic delays of having your monies released, etc. So, Lebo, I'm not able to give a particular, you know, product, but just, you know, for consumers to be responsible about your finances, because ultimately you want to plan, you want to be financially sound, you want to be, you know, not sitting with the stresses of being you know, over indebted. So just plan your finances accordingly, make provision for savings, even if it is as little as 100 Rand a month. You know, the economic situation is dire out there, and it is important for consumers to be cognizant of this, to be cognizant of your work arrangements, and you know, pay reductions in that regard. So just look at a scheme or you know, a service and an offering that would cater for your specific situation. Thanks.
Thank you, Verushka. Thank you very much. Jimmy Golele, there's a question here. I think you can answer this one. Where parties are married in community of property and one party applies for debt review, should both parties be considered for debt review?
Definitely, Lewu. If parties are married in community of property, one party cannot enter into debt review to the exclusion of the other party. When one party goes in, the other party is automatically affected by the debt review process, and it should be a joint application. Thank you.
Thank you. So there's a follow-up to that. Similarly, where parties are married in community of property and the other party did not consent to a credit agreement, can the credit agreement be challenged for suspension if the assessment for both parties could have led to over-indebtedness? Jimmy, are you able to answer this one?
I think for that one, it will depend on the circumstances of how it happened, because ordinarily, when the assessment is done and it should affect both parties and both parties should give consent. So there is no clear-cut answer. Does it suggest that there was fraud that happened? Does it suggest that there was recklessness? So depending on the circumstances under which this credit agreement was entered into, it may either affect one or both of the parties at the end of the day.
Thank you. I think this one between Jimmy and Verushka, maybe I can ask Verushka to take this one. I'm from a development finance institution. We conduct affordability assessment for both procurement finance and long-term business loans. Is this against the National Credit Act?
Thanks, Lebo. So your DFI, if it is extending developmental credit, then it would have to be registered with the credit regulator. So I don't think anything that you are doing is against the Act. In any case, it would have received a supplementary credit registration from the regulator. So no, to put it quite simply, you're not doing anything that is against the Credit Act. The Act is quite explicit, you know, about developmental credit providers having to be registered with the credit regulator. So I think all is in order on your side. Thanks.
Thank you. With regards to Tobani, I remember in Tobani's presentation, you mentioned warranties, you also mentioned return of goods. So going into Black Friday and the festive season, Tobani, if you get some of those shops where at the point of purchase, you are told right there that there's no refund, you can't even return the product. So you have to be sure, or you have to fit it in the store if it's a clothing item and so forth. So the minute that you leave the store, you can return that. Is that within the law? What kind of tips can you give to consumers? Because I know a lot of people are going to purchase tomorrow and going into the festive season, you realize later that, maybe I don't need this, you want to return it. What tips do you have for us?
Thank you, Lebo, and thank you for that wonderful question. I would advise consumers to stay away from such stores wherein they have a no return policy. They have a responsibility to actually assess and see which stores would actually, which stores would uphold their rights. But if they see that a store is actually upfront and saying if they purchase something from that store, they are not entitled to any refund, return, they should stay away from such. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Tobani. I don't see any further questions from the participants. My other question is with regards to you, Tobani, as well. When it comes to COVID-19, what has been the impact of COVID-19 with regards to consumer rights? Have you seen a change?
Yes, Lebu, thank you very much for that question as well. In some instances, suppliers would make COVID-19 an excuse and violate consumer rights. That's why in the beginning of my presentation, I said that consumer rights are sacrosanct even during the pandemic. They prevail. They are just like human rights. There is no time wherein they are on hold or something. Thank you.
Thanks, Tobani. To Jimmy. Jimmy, in terms of over-indebtedness, what methods or what alternatives do consumers have if they find that they are battling to repay their debts?
Thank you, Lebu. Great question. Consumers who are struggling with their debts, whether as a result of COVID-19 or any other circumstances, have a few options that they can consider. One, a consumer can approach the credit provider, indicate their circumstances, and request that their debt be rescheduled. That is, the credit provider will probably offer them a lower installment that is within their means, and then they can get into a new credit agreement. This shouldn't be a verbal agreement, it should be reduced to writing so that there are no challenges later. If this does not work, if that consumer is employed and has an income, we will then encourage them to go for debt counseling, in which case the debt counselor will then take these discussions on their behalf. The advantage of using the debt counselor is that in case the credit provider is unwilling to consider the request of the consumer, then the debt counselor is empowered in terms of the National Credit Act to approach a court and try to enforce the right of the consumer to get assistance in terms of lowered installments. Another alternative which consumers have under the circumstances would be to use credit life insurance. You will recall when I was making a presentation that I indicated that one of the things that drives the cost of credit up is the charges that are related to credit, and one of them is credit life insurance. So a lot of people would pay credit life insurance for things that they got on credit, but not take advantage of that credit life insurance when the need arises. So a consumer should check if there is a credit life insurance attached to the credit agreement that they have. And when the circumstances arise, then they can make use of that particular credit life insurance. And the last option would be what we call surrender of goods. This happens in terms of Section 127 of the National Credit Act, but it is an option which consumers must approach with caution, because a lot of consumers would think once they have surrendered the goods, it is the end of the story. They should follow the processes right through to the very end. By this, I mean, if you have surrendered your car, for instance, the credit provider will sell your car at a public auction. If you had a balance of, say, for example, 200,000, if they sell your car for 220,000, then they should settle the balance of your credit agreement and hand over the 20,000 to you. However, if they sell the car for a loss, say they sell the car for 160,000, the shortfall is still due by you. So you should make a follow-up and make sure that is all sorted out. Because a lot of people will surrender goods, and 3 months later, they get a letter or an SMS from the credit provider saying, you owe us 30,000, and they say, go to hell because I have surrendered the car to you. Why are you looking for money from me? Thank you, Lebo.
Thank you, Jimmy. There's a request that when we answer from the panelists, can we please switch on our cameras? So when you answer, please switch on your camera so that they can see you. Thanks for that, Jimmy. There's a question, I think, Tobani, you can take this one. How can we stop telemarketers from calling us? Are you able to take this one, Tobani? Please switch on your camera.
Thank you, Lebo. It's a good question. We are all aware that there is a new regulator, the information regulator. They regulate POPIA. However, they are still in the foundation phase, and they are still not able to prosecute. But in such instances where a marketer calls to contact you, you have a right to opt out. You should tell that telemarketer that you're not interested and they should not call you again. Yeah, I think that should cover the question. Thank you.
Thanks, Tobani. Jimmy, is there something you want to say? Jimmy, you are muted. Please switch on your camera.
Thank you, Lebo. A lot of consumers wonder when they get calls from telemarketers and other service providers as to why they are being called and where they get their contact information from. I would like to remind and warn consumers that as and when they apply for credit agreements, a lot of credit providers would have a provision at the end or somewhere in the body of the credit agreement form whereby they ask you whether you allow or you give them permission to share your information with their partners. The minute you tick yes in that box, therefore that particular credit provider or service provider can share your information with other people, which ends up with you getting calls from telemarketers. So it is also our responsibility to make sure we don't open ourselves up by ticking yes. Tick no, it has no effect on whether they will approve or not approve your application for credit. Thank you.
Thanks, Jimmy. Thanks for the clarity with regards to that as well. Just in closing, I'm gonna ask all our panelists, I'll start with you, Tobani, just to give us your procedure when it comes to lodging a complaint with the NCC. If you can briefly tell us how does one go about to lodge a complaint, and then share your contact details again, and then we'll go to Jimmy, then Verushka. Thank you. Don't forget to switch on your camera.
Thank you, Lebo. We have a complaints procedure in place. However, as I mentioned in the presentation, we have jurisdiction throughout the Republic, and However, we have concurrent jurisdiction with other regulators. I would say to consumers, their first line of defense should be the province in which they are in. They should approach the Consumer Affairs Office and try to lodge a complaint. Especially when the consumer and the supplier falls in the same province. But in instances wherein the consumer and the complainant reside in different provinces, they may approach MIOSA if it is a motor-related complaint. But if it's a complaint related to goods and services, they may approach CGSO. In filing the complaint with the NCC, they should have the full details of the supplier, and they also should have their full details. There's a complaint form that they need to complete, and they can access the form on our website, or they may send it. They may send a query on an email, inquiries@ncc.org.za, or they may contact our contact center on 012-428-7000 and request a form to be sent to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Tobani. Jimmy, please take us through the complaints process of the National Credit Regulator and the contact details.
Thank you, Lebu. To lodge a complaint with the National Credit Regulator, the consumer has various options. They can call the National Credit Regulator at 0860-627-627. I have put these numbers on the chat box, and lodge a complaint telephonically. Our officers will reduce their complaint to writing, or they can send an email to the email address that I've given. Or alternatively, those who have access to the necessary infrastructure, they can download the form on our website. It's Form 29, which is our complaint form. They can download the form, fill it, and then send it through to the NCR and attach the necessary supporting documents. I thank you. I think that answers the question, Lebu.
Thanks, Jimmy. Verushka, please take us through the DTIC's complaints procedure.
Sure, thanks, Lebo. We don't have a particular centralized, a particular form for complaints, for the submission of complaints, but we do have a contact center that can be emailed with the concerns or queries that consumers might have. I did put the information on the chat box, but the alternative email address that can be used is contact us at the dtic.gov.za. Thanks. This information is also available on the DTIC website. Thanks, Lebo.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we have come to the end of our webinar, and I would like to thank everyone who took time to attend, who took time to take part with question and answers. I would also like to thank all our panelists, Verushka, Tobani, and Jimmy Kolele. I would like to also thank the project team who have been working with us since day one to put it together. Everyone from the Proudly South African, from the National Credit Regulator and the National Consumer Commission. Thank you very much. And thank you for your time. Enjoy Black Friday and enjoy your festive season. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.